Hi, I'm Eric Dowsett and I'd like to talk a little about personal conflict. This may be a little bit of a different approach to what you're used to when dealing with personal conflict, but I think if we can look at the cause rather than try and fix a problem once it's arisen, we've got a better chance of leading quite a different life. From my understanding that has been gained over many years of working with energy, with people, with the environment, I've come to understand that the body develops in certain ways. It picks up information either inherited through DNA or acquired through personal experience, picked up in early childhood. We develop likes, we develop dislikes. Much of the conditioning that we experience is on a subconscious level. We don't actually know that we're being conditioned. And it's very difficult, of course, to step outside of that conditioning and observe it objectively, because we get lost in it. We're brought up in it. It is who we are. We see this as our personality. This is, in a sense, a reflection of who we've become. And whilst we're lost in that, there's very little we can do to actually change it. Of course, we try and change things to improve our life, to improve our situation, to improve our health, to improve our well-being, to improve our financial state, our relationship state, all sorts of things like that. But the subconscious pattern that's driving us is very often in conflict with what we really think we want. And it's this internal conflict that we experience that tends to show up in our relationships with others at home, at work, in social conditioning, even in when we go to the supermarket, when we go to the bank, etc. We take with us this parcel that we've developed, which we call personality, which has got a lot of subconscious triggers. Now, we have those triggers simply because we are attached to a point of view. We believe this is who we are. We believe that the world needs to be a certain way in order for us to feel safe and happy, comfortable. But of course, that is a very unique standpoint. And very often, more likely than not, other people have very different ideas about what they want the world to be in order for them to be safe and happy. And if those ideas conflict with yours, then of course they're going to trigger your buttons about personal safety. You'll trigger their buttons about personal safety. What happens then is that the brain starts to produce more chemicals, neuropeptides. The neuropeptides eventually form into amino acids, which are the building blocks of life. They cascade through the body. They enter the cells where the cell is receptive to that particular chemical, and they generate the pathology of feeling. And so where we continue to identify with a point of view, where we hang on to something really strongly, we're bound to experience someone who is in conflict with that point of view, because someone else is going to hang on to a very different point of view, and they're going to trigger this chemical reaction in the body. As we continue then to identify with this particular reaction, as we think these feelings, these chemicals that are flooding the body, are who we are, we get lost in this feeling, which can be very uncomfortable. We feel threatened, we feel attacked, we go into defense, and if the pressure doesn't ease off, then we'll attack. And of course the other person is experiencing much the same. Their subconscious patterns are triggering off in them a similar chemical reaction in their body, which they find very uncomfortable, and of course they react accordingly. And so then we get a lot of conflict arising from a situation which really needn't have happened had one or the other person been aware of what was going on. Aware of what is going on simply means that we understand that the body has conditioned itself over time, primarily subconsciously, to react to certain stimuli. and react in a very intense way. And the moment an intense reaction is triggered, of course, there are too many chemicals in the body for us to step back and say, hang on a moment, this is just a chemical reaction. It's not necessarily who I am. It is certainly not who I want to be, because this feeling that arises when conflict shows up makes me feel very uncomfortable, makes me feel disempowered, makes me feel threatened, makes me want to do things or say things that I know in the morning I might regret. I can perhaps best illustrate this with a short story. This happened a few years ago at a workshop I was presenting in Ireland, where a young woman showed up back in town, the town that she was born in, after several years' absence. And of course, coming back, she needed to go and visit her parents, her mother in particular. She wasn't looking forward to this experience because previous visits to the mother had ended in all sorts of feelings of discomfort and anger and aggression. Very uncomfortable indeed. This was a pattern that she was in with her mother. She was at the workshop. It was a 3-day program, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. On Saturday night, after experiencing and practicing clearing, she went off to see the mother. And we all, of course, waited to see on Sunday how she would feel. And on Sunday morning, she was absolutely beaming. She was very, very positive. She'd had a wonderful experience. She said that it was such a wonderful time with her mother that she could have spent a lot longer there. As it was, she was there for an hour and a half, and there was not one moment of conflict or argument or uncomfortable feelings. So what had happened? What had changed? Unlikely that the mother had changed. Mother and daughter tend to carry the same stuff. They have the same sort of conditioning, the same sort of patterning, and so very likely to set each other off, to trigger each other's buttons, and of course that was what was happening. And so on the Saturday when she arrived to visit her mother, she practiced what she'd learned in the previous 2 days about noticing how the body changes. And remember, I said the body changes because of the chemicals that are released into the body. So she would notice the changes in the body, the different chemicals and their effects. And instead of taking them personally, instead of reacting strongly as she had done in the past, she just let them go. She noticed them, but she didn't take them seriously. She didn't take them personally. She simply allowed them to be and pass. And of course they did, those things passed, because she wasn't giving them energy. If she'd have taken the old road, the old path, and identified strongly with those feelings, then she would have created in her body very, very uncomfortable feelings indeed. And of course then that uncomfortable feeling strengthens her feeling of blame that her mother is responsible for these feelings, for creating these feelings in her. And of course then the mother's feelings become more intense, and then the mother thinks that the daughter's to blame for creating these feelings in her. And of course they would go on and on and on, creating more and more intense feelings until people started throwing things around the room, emotions just completely out of control. People were saying things and doing things that they really didn't mean, but they had no control over. They were total victims to their emotional energy. But on this occasion, the daughter simply allowed the feelings to pass. She didn't grab a hold of them and try and justify them and feel angry and defensive. She just let them go. And of course, when you let them go, you're not creating more chemicals, you're not creating more discomfort in your own body, which is not being transmitted out to the other body. And so in this case, the mother, instead of being threatened by her daughter's behaviour, was all of a sudden being allowed to express all of her subconscious conditioning. And she did. And when that had been expressed, and of course her body was not becoming more and more uncomfortable either as a result of the daughters stepping back, then they were able to have wonderful dialogue, truly meaningful connection that they hadn't had in years. This is going on all of the time. This is something that we're all involved in on one level or another. And so using this example, we can see that if we follow a slightly different approach, then it's possible to avoid conflict before it even arises. And so rather than try and fix conflict once it's showing up, which is a very, very difficult thing to do, we can begin to practice before it shows up. Before conflict shows up in our lives, we need to start to take a notice of what's going on, how we're feeling at any given point in time. And recognize that when there's a change in how we feel, there's just been a slight, subtle, sometimes not so subtle, shift in the chemical composition of the body. We put more chemicals in, we put less chemicals in. We put chemicals that make us feel good, we've put chemicals that make us feel uncomfortable. When we realize that we are actually doing that through no fault of our own, in the sense that this is all arising out of the subconscious, we need to bring that subconscious into our awareness so that we can work with it, so that we can understand it, so that we can stop feeding it, stop energizing it, so that situations of conflict do not arise. This has been a very brief introduction to personal conflict as seen through the eyes of someone who is into clearing, and clearing is something, of course, that I talk a lot more about on my website. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, take care.